Pleased to introduce Dr. Dabika Sihi, who spoke last year on Zoom. So we're really glad to have her here in person. So Dr. Sihi is an associate professor here at Southwestern University. So any Southwestern U grads or associates? She spent some time in corporate America and then attended the University of Texas McCombs Business School. Any UT grads? Woohoo? No woohoos for UT? Okay, all right. And Dr. Sihi is published in several publications in her fields of marketing, and she also supports the local communities that are doing startups and entrepreneurship. So I asked her what something that nobody knows about her. She said she has a dog and she has a cat, but she wants to get, there we go. She wants to get another cat, so.
I got 3.
So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Dabika Sihi. Thank you.
So a little bit about me. Thank you for that oh so kind introduction. Please call me Dabika. I am never going to save anyone's life, so the doctor title still feels very weird to me. I go by Dabika. My research is very much looking at technology and how technology has changed for the good and sometimes more complicated business strategy. And it's interesting, in the last year we found, I read somewhere people hate the word unprecedented now because we've heard it so much for a year, but a lot of unprecedented change where technology actually enabled businesses to thrive and in some ways maybe made it a little bit more complicated. But what I noticed most of all were these brand communities that sprung up in the past year that really advocated for small businesses. I have friends who are small business owners. I study small to medium-sized businesses. So that's sort of the inspiration for the talk today. I am a teacher, so it's interactive. So I hope that there's points where you won't have to just hear me talk, but I can ask you all questions. I promised Aiden and Ashley, if no one wants to say anything, then I'm going to call on them. So let's not do that to them, and hopefully people will participate. So a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. Before I can talk about brand communities, you mentioned I work a lot with startups. The first exercise I always have a new business do, and for some of you who are more established, you may say, I already know this. And you may at a very anecdotal level, or it may be a while since you revisited, but what is it that what need do you solve in the community? Whether that's home repair, whether you're providing financial services, whether you're caring for our furry friends. I know I have a friend in the audience. So what is it that you're solving? Then who are your customers? What do they do? How do they spend time? How much income do they have to spend? What are their needs and challenges? And then once we've established that, what are brand communities? Please interrupt me at any time. Ask me questions. Like, I'm here to help any way that I can, and also to learn from you all. So the first thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is what problem are you solving? So there should be slides on the page, on the tables. If you need a slide later, you don't have one, please email me, I can send it to you. But really, whether you are a for-profit business, a nonprofit, an NGO, you are solving a problem, and that can range from providing IT services, helping provide pet health and wellness needs, providing financial services. So I'm curious to get an idea of the mix in the room today. If you had to define your business with one line, like this is the problem we solve in Georgetown or the area, what would it be? Anyone?
I help businesses get their advertising and marketing message into every home and apartment in Georgia.
That is incredibly important. Every home or apartment. Anyone else? Absolutely. If you don't know about it, how can you actually go and support that business? The reason I do this, and I will tell you when we work with startups, they're like, of course I know what I do, is it's important to revisit this because, again, that helps you focus, who am I serving in that? So I took a business in Georgetown. I don't know if the owner is here, Cheryl, 18 Karat Bakery, just because I like the name and I like baked goods. So 18 Karat Bakery is a bakery and they use organic ingredients and they're really smart. They have started kids camps for cooking and they also offer afternoon high tea. After all the royal weddings, high tea is very important now and something trendy. But if I look at them, they're serving a need for a health conscious consumer, someone that needs the baked good. And understanding this is really important because it brings you to, so if this is the need I'm solving, if I'm providing signage for all businesses, then who is my customer? And understanding that segmentation. I know you all had a session on market research. Does some of this look a little bit familiar to you? Thinking about how do you actually define? So if I look at your business, providing marketing and advertising in every apartment complex, you might work with small businesses, large businesses, medium-sized businesses. Are they mostly in the Georgetown or Williamson County area?
We serve ones that are in Georgetown, but I give them access to all of the communities.
That's fantastic. So for you, where do they live? All of Georgetown. Thinking about how big are the businesses? On average, what is their income level look like? Where else are they advertising? So where do their advertising dollars go? This is really important because it helps you think about who are the members of your brand community going to be. If you provide primarily B2B services, you can think of it in the same way. So where your organizational is located, how much do they spend on average? If you're looking at B2C, think about the growing population of Georgetown. Home repair services are probably at an all-time high demand. So what does that target consumer look like? Are they families? Are they single family homes, multiple family homes? And trying to get a picture of your market segment. So I wanted us to all spend 5 minutes because again, 45 minutes is a long time to hear my voice alone. And just think about these categories and create your market segment. You don't have to do this, but like if you could go through all the boxes, could you fill out most of that detail for your target market? I know we have representation from Mary Kay. I know we have representation from different firms that provide financial services, legal services, career services. Shout out to Austin. So if there's things that you could fill in, I'd be curious to see if there's one box that's harder for you all compared to the others. I'll give it like 2. Are you laughing because I gave homework?
I like it.
I hear some great conversations about people that have broad services. So for Chick-fil-A that may hit a multiple audience versus a Mary Kay where you may have a much more targeted segment. Does anyone feel comfortable to share theirs?
I'm with the Georgetown View magazine,
Mm-hmm.
and we have 2 customers.
Absolutely.
One customer is the people that receive the magazine. Because we tell stories with different things. We tell uplifting stories and stuff like that. That give people a sense of pride about their community. and uplifting and encouraging type of people. So that's one customer. But then again, you're not a nonprofit, you know, gotta pay bills. And so our other customer is the people who do advertising with us.
Mhm.
And those are completely different. One doesn't pay at all,
Right.
and the other pays everything. Really. And so we kind of got two customers going on at the same time. Is that unique, or just, do other people kind of talk about that
I had
situation?
exactly the same problem. So I started my business right in the middle of, I had it all planned, handed in my resignation on the 28th of February, and started my business offering library services to small child schools that can't afford libraries and private schools. Consumer libraries are very, very important. I didn't want to trade holdings. So I had to kind of segue into homeschooling. So now I have clients, I teach research skills to homeschoolers and to homeschooling parents who then have kids. But I'm still trying to build up working with charter schools and I'm homeschooling. So that's business to business and business to consumer. So I don't know if you are very different. I think a lot of people probably have something kind of capable in both areas.
So
I would say, feedback on that, so we're in the pregnant side business, and everyone's a customer, whether it's somebody who's walking in to do wedding invitations one time with us, or, you know, Southwestern is one of our bigger accounts. So it's hard for us to define, like, our market, when we can offer something to pretty much everyone. But we do talk about that and how it's important, you know, everyone can be treated the same, but some customers have
So you all raised a really good point. What if you have, in most businesses, not all, but most businesses will have multiple segments. In your case, your revenue model is contingent on one of the advertisers, but without readership and eyeballs, those advertisers are not motivated. So how do you create a community around that? And so that's kind of the third part, but it is interesting because in all your advertising and what you post on social media, and Georgetown Chamber of Commerce actually does a great job of this, you'll want to think about, is this something that could be compelling to both groups? So are there pieces of information or things that you could share that advertisers could see and get excited about, but also your readership? And it's hard. Sometimes you can't. In the case of B2C, B2B businesses, something about weddings is going to look very differently than if we need to print something to scale. But how do you create that engagement with both? And so that's kind of the third part of this. The reason we do this exercise, and I've worked with agencies, and I know Gay Gaddis came and talked here a few weeks ago, is it's important because it makes you get into the nitty gritty of each group. So what are the pain points for the charter schools that you're solving? And what are the pain points for the individual consumers? So there is a reason for the madness, I promise. One thing I wanted to give you, I always hate going to a talk where there are no tools. You're like, that person talked for 45 minutes, but I learned nothing or I got nothing out of it. So I provided some sources and I won't go through all of it, but as you were doing this, for some of you, you know your businesses really well, but you might want some more data. I provided a little bit and I'll just pull up a couple of them that may be useful and you may already know. The Census Bureau gives you really high level data on the county, but Jim is probably in his seat like, why are you showing this when we have something so much better? Part of the reason you join the chamber is so that you can get access to great information, and you'll see there's the economic development, the small business guide. These are really helpful if you are a newer business in Georgetown to get an idea of the profile. I won't go through all of this. Pew Research, do any of you use it? I was thinking particularly of yours. Do you use Pew Research for some of your? It's a fantastic independent think tank out of DC, and they have topics and information on all kinds of things. So I looked at generations and age just because I think Central Texas is now one where we have such a wide variance of different generations that are in this same community and understanding. But they look at trends like new habits in media, pet ownership, financial planning, so things that may be important. Again, it's usually on a national scale, not in a localized community, but might be useful. And just for fun, and Ashley and Aiden may have seen this, There are some market research companies that will give you pretty high level data and it's pretty slow. So I'll see if it's fast for you. Has anyone ever done this before? You can put in like a Georgetown zip code and hit submit. And so I'll wait for a second. It usually takes. They actually segment out the zip code for you. So again, it's really high level, but especially if you're a B2C business, it might be useful. So they're marketers, they give everything a funny name. There's white picket fences, new homesteaders, kids in cul-de-sacs.
Where you go to regions,
Mm-hmm.
and you can research and pull out different topics.
Put in the zip code, yeah. So, and I think that's one that I put,
Yeah, it's in the packet on the
It
secondary
is in-
research. It's the last.
it's the last row, Clarita's, and it's my best segment.
That's what it's called.
Yep.
Segment.
My best segment.
I think she's trying to say it's in your packet.
It's in your packet, I'll put that one. Right there.
So full disclosure, they have like 72 categories and they will force your zip code into those buckets. So you might say, this is sort of right, but it doesn't capture like the college students at Southwestern who are saying 70. And you're absolutely right. They have 72 segments and they force it, but they've done research across the United States and they're like, this is pretty reflective. So if I picked kids in cul-de-sacs, and again, it's pretty slow. It is their free service, but it's nice. What you'll see, and I'll probably come back to it, is they'll give you some pretty interesting behavioral data about it. So here we go. So it tells you that the people that live here, what their, and I'll make it bigger, how many households are like this, their median household income. But I would argue the most interesting pieces, and I was hoping as you were doing the boxes that might be hardest to find are, so what do these people do in their free time? How do they spend their time? They own an Infinity, they like Dick's Sporting Goods. Again, it's a generalization, and you may say to me, that's not exactly true, but they're usually pretty accurate. And it's one group.
We were both saying we live on a cul-de-sac and we're like,
None of that's true. So again, so generalized. So it may or may not be informative, but kind of interesting. What is interesting is it'll tell you other counties that are similar to that in the United States. So you might find that there's, if you're thinking about geographically expanding or just thinking about what are other businesses in towns like mine, useful data. Again, very high level generalized, like my zip code in Houston where I'm from, I look at it, I'm like, that's not me at all. I know, I'm like, do I have to move if I don't fit in one of the buckets? So the last thing I wanted to do before we move to brain communities is if you are thinking about collecting more data. So if you are thinking about how can I expand my print services for people that want to do weddings, everyone who didn't have a wedding in 2020 is now having a wedding. And that is a very popular market, is we're seeing on campus where we hold weddings. You can definitely do primary research, which is actually collecting data from your customers or groups. And so again, I just put some tools there. You may have a CRM system, like a lot of you may use SurveyMonkey or like, MailChimp, Salesforce. If you don't, and you're like, nope, we don't actually have a customer relationship management system. If you have a Gmail account, anyone that has a Gmail account, and Ashley can help you with this more than me because we're a Google-based college. You can go to Google Drive in your Gmail account, and then if you hit it, and I'll show you what it looks like from a Gmail account, and you hit new up here, you have access to Google Forms. Has anyone used that before? Google Forms right here. And so I'll show you again, it was new. And so Google basically they've made their workspace now free after COVID. So the same thing like PowerPoint, Excel, Google has its own unpaid version of that, and Google Forms is their survey tool. And if you wait for it to load, I'm sorry, it's taking so long. It says it's loading. It's basically a survey builder, and it's super easy. I'm going to let it load and come back to it, but you can add questions. And what's nice is all of your data comes back in a spreadsheet. I'm so sorry it's taking so long. All right.
Amazing to me is how churches have finally figured out how important it is to understand what's going on in their community, so that they know about the people that are around them and how they can reach them.
Absolutely.
We have some really good churches that denominations, and the information they gave us is very, very valuable.
That's fantastic. And I love that they're going into the communities to get that inbound. And that's one of the reasons primary research is important. So Claritas updates their segments annually, but there's things you can miss in your local community. Like if I use that to target you with the marketing message, you'd be like, that's totally off. And so supplementing that with primary research is great. Let me see if it did it. Thank goodness. So this is what Google Forms looks like. So you could put in like a survey. So I could put in Eagle Home Repair Services, and it's pretty easy. You have different questions, like you can add multiple choice, you can do check boxes, and all of your data will come into a beautiful spreadsheet. Super easy. If you have a Gmail account, it works. So it's a great way to collect data. I know I went through that pretty fast. I'm trying to be mindful of prize time in 15 minutes, but I will absolutely send you the link or help if anyone has questions. What's nice about it though, is it's not a brand new thing. If you have a Gmail account, it's part of what you're already using. So just some tools and resources. Your great question. I try to put all of the tools and links in the right so you can find them, but they're not hyperlinked. So if you want me to send it to you in hyperlink format, just let me or Jim know. I'm happy to send that to anyone. So why do we want all of this data? Once you've collected all this data, you build what I would call a target profile. So when I teach in this class, the students always kind of giggle and they're like, this is very like targeted. It's sort of like what Claritas does, but I came up with Health Conscious Hannah for a new protein bar brand. She lives in urban settings. I know that she works full time and commutes for work. Her annual income, concerned about the environment, and then how she spends her time. She likes Orange Theory over near Wolf Ranch. Why would I care about all of these things? When I decide to build my brand community, I need to understand what makes my customer, whether it's B2B or B2C, tick. And so having this information helps me understand. If she has 1 to 2 pets a year and travels domestically, what I might consider posting in the summertime is how to travel with your pet, best pet travel tips. You might find that that'll engage with your audience, but I wouldn't know to post information like that unless I had some detail on who Health Conscious Hannah was. And so that's why we go through the exercise. Which segments to target is just some additional information I put in there. Some of you have multiple segments and you may need multiple segments. But if you are finding that you're a small business and your resources are being spread pretty thin, sometimes focusing on one first. So maybe you focus on charter schools because of the scalability of that first, and then look at individual customers. And I'm not saying that's what you should do, but it's helpful just because you have a finite amount of resources to do. Does that make sense? Absolutely.
I came across an example of how most people do target marketing, and it came in a Peanuts cartoon. Snoopy is by his doghouse, and he has a new bow and arrow in the first square. In the second square, he's shooting the arrow in the air. The third square, the arrow lands in the ground.
Yeah.
And in the fourth square, he is painting the bullseye around the arrow.
Where it landed.
And that's how most people do their target marketing. Wherever it lands,
Yes.
well, that's where I need to be.
Absolutely. And so There's some people who are very lucky. It's funny, like in business, in our a business program, we read this story about Ben and Jerry's ice cream. I don't know if you are familiar with their story in Vermont. That's basically how they ended up. They located in Burlington, Vermont. They were like, oh, we're near a college campus. Burlington, Vermont, mind you, is not a warm climate. It is for like 1 month a year, but there was no competition there. There was no Baskin Robbins when they entered. So low competition market, close to Canada, where no one else would think to open an ice cream business. And they found that there was a, but it wasn't strategic. It's just where they landed. I would argue maybe taking a step back and where you're like, okay, I could land in these, and doing some research is usually a little bit, especially if you're resource constrained. You may be able to hit multiple target markets, but the planning, I think, can be useful in how strategic your advertising is. But to your point, that is how most businesses end up figuring out, because they're solving a problem and they're like, oh, we see that there's, and sometimes you may uncover a target market you didn't even know needed your product or service. So it's a great point. I would argue some of the criteria that are most helpful, and not all of these are the recommended tips, are really thinking about expected growth of the market. Bless you. So if Georgetown's demographic is shifting both in terms of customers, businesses and individuals that are moving here, how do you see your services being able to serve them? Or maybe there's a new group that is coming in that you might be able to help. I would also argue as the educational system is changing, you have a lot of disruption that will be favorable to this type of service you're providing. So just staying abreast of that. I gave you one more tool. Again, my hope today is just to leave you with tools, not necessarily tell you what to do. And this is from HubSpot. Do any of you all use HubSpot in your business? Yay!
Great blog, lots of great information. I pass a lot on to our business.
They are an amazing company. They're based out of Boston. Two young entrepreneurs out of, I think they were both from MIT, if I'm not mistaken, like one on the development side, one on the business side. And they provide marketing tools, a complete CRM system. What's nice is even if you're not a paid customer, they have free blogs, free training, free certifications. And so this is something I stole from them. I did give them credit at the top right. So it is a target market profile sheet. If you have someone that is working and that's trying to define or maybe really refine your profile about your B2B or B2C customers, this is something you can use. It's just a template that they recommend for businesses. It may or may not be useful. If you want the whole sheet and the guide, there's a 30-page PowerPoint in a book. Happy to send that to you, or you can download it. They will take your email if you download it, so you may not want to get on their email list. I'm happy to send that to you. So the last part, the part that was the main focus of this, but we needed to take that path to get there's your brand communities. So maybe you know now your two target segments, and most of you I think knew before you came, were the advertisers and the local community who cares passionately about Georgetown and seeing stories of people in the community. Those are your two. So then how do you build a community where they're engaged? They're not just reading your magazine, but they're recommending it to friends. They're continuing to read it. They are maybe thinking about ways they might become an advertiser. What we've also found is these brand communities are great sources of ideation. So you may find, to your point, that your community suggests things that you didn't know was a need. I'll give you a great example. There's a local bakery in Austin called Crema Bakery, who during the pandemic had to shut down their doors. So they quickly pivoted to curbside, but it took a few weeks. But what they realized is their customers were most concerned about their basic grocery supplies. Although H-E-B is amazing and did great things, there were things that were running out: milk, bread, eggs. So they started working with their supplier who supplies the bakery and just providing staples. And that was something that came up in their social media. They're like, people kept Facebook messaging us to ask us, we don't actually want the croissant, but do you just have eggs? I have 3 kids at home and I need eggs. And so it was a great way for them to serve the community and also like learn how they could pivot and adapt their operations to serve those needs. So I would argue your brand community can be a great source of ideation for new products or new adaptations. Building Brand Communities is a book that goes into a lot of detail, a lot more detail than I'm going in with you today. If you're interested, it's like $14 on Amazon. So I put it in there and it can tell you. A couple of great examples, and I am watching time, so I only have 5 minutes left, Jim, don't worry, that I thought you might want to look at are 3 that I am pretty familiar with and involved with in Austin. I figured I'd pick Austin because I was like, I don't want to pick someone's brand in here. That could get like awkward or like competitive. So I just picked 3 in Austin. So the Louis Law Firm, I don't know if any of you have heard of them. It's a law firm and they have thousands of followers, which is sort of unusual on Facebook and Instagram. But the reason they have built a strong brand community is he engages with other small businesses in Austin. So Austin Pets Alive is, I wouldn't say small, pretty big nonprofit that helps cats and dogs. When their air conditioning went out, he like funded 2 new air conditions for them. And so APA told all their followers, you should follow Louis Law Firm. Here are the law services they provide, and he's an animal lover. He is involved with different charities. He like is at different events in Austin. So it's interesting, his Facebook posts about his legal services and changes in in the legal environment, but it also posts about Austin. It also posts about his partners, and that has gained him a lot of traction. And so he comes up and is recommended pretty frequently for his legal services, even though his page doesn't just talk about that. Radiant Plumbing and Air, you may have heard their commercials. They're on the radio all the time, all the time. Brad and Sarah, they have a pretty high following for a plumbing and air conditioning company. There's lots of great plumbing and air conditioning companies in Austin, but they come up, they're funny. I cannot tell you enough about, they make jokes, they make lots of toilet jokes, but they make lots of different engaging humor. They have people post their worst plumbing disasters, some of which is funny, some of you are like, oh, a little cringy, but people like it. And they have made a community that's pretty strong, and they feature their different technicians and tell you stories about them and their family. And I will tell you, they have the highest referral rating out of anyone in that business in Austin. So while it seems like a soft skill, you're like building this community, it can actually lead to traction in terms of sales and growth. And the last one, in case there were some nonprofits in the group, is Urban Roots. Has anyone heard of it? They work with middle school to high school aged youth in Austin and teach them how to plant and care for their garden and actually learn food nutrition, because you get to college and you're like Ashley and Aiden, you don't want them to eat Hot Pockets every day. You want them to be able to cook like a healthy meal because it's good for their health and their life. So that's what they do. They give scholarships to middle school students to participate. They do an amazing job engaging the community. They will post stories about youth. They post stories about their sponsors and how they connected to it. And that's been really successful because featuring your sponsors and highlighting them. So I think about people that have the advertisers and how they connect to the mission. That probably gets the most traction. And then those sponsors' followers start following urban youth. So I think these are just a few of the strategies if you want to look at their page. I will not make you do the next activity. I brought it just in case we didn't have discussion, but I will leave it for you. It has a very dark title, No Mother's Day. It is a nonprofit that actually was started by Christy Turlington Burns, who the name may not sound familiar, but Christy Turlington, she was a supermodel, like in the 90s when Cindy Crawford was a supermodel. If you Google her, you'll be like, oh, I remember her face from shampoo commercials. But she had a very traumatic experience in childbirth and realized that this was more common than she thought across the world. She received really good health care, so it wasn't. So she started a nonprofit and they launched a campaign called No Mother's Day, where they actually had mothers go silent to bring attention to this worldwide cause. The reason I brought this up was not to tell you about the issue, or it's kind of a dark story, but they give such great examples of how, if you don't have a brand community or you're thinking about leveraging social media, you can. So starting with a goal. Do you want more people to come to the store? Do you want more people to download your white paper if you're financial or legal services so that that can lead to the first talk? Do you want more people to maybe call you to find out about your services? Once you start with that, you can think about the next steps. What is the content that will lead to that? So it's pretty useful. You'll be shocked at how many people participated in her campaign. So I wanted to leave that as sort of a last piece, if you are building your community, to think about the different steps for it. So I feel like I've talked a lot. Hopefully I've not bored you to death and some of this will be useful. That is all. Jim, I'm a minute early.
Good.
So if there are any questions I can answer, otherwise I will stick around after. Thank you so much for your time.
So